So, one question that's been on my mind since damn near the release of the game is, why is Radahn so damn big? It's one of those questions that never really gets an official answer, but the most popular theory was simply that he was a descendant of the giants. Which would make sense, as it is implied that Radahn's father himself is also descended from the giants. But this would then disprove a theory of Radahn and America having always been conjoined entities, which I never really fully subscribed to anyways, but it did have legitimate credibility. Because how could someone who's supposedly always been an aspect of another have his own individual genetics? Marika clearly isn't a giant, but somehow her alter ego, who supposedly has always been a part of her, is? That just doesn't make sense. Another popular theory was simply that it was because of his great rune that he grew in size, which would make sense. It's somewhat implied that each great rune has its own unique properties. So for all we know, maybe Radahn just has one that makes you giant. But it's also often that runes themselves are a reflection of their hosts. Something of a crystallization of their being, personalities, principles, strengths. So I want to disregard this theory too, since it could very well lead in either direction. We do know for a fact that great runes do have some influence on size. There is a direct correlation for sure. Let's look at the demigods, who are all above average heights compared to your simple human knights and soldiers, but that could simply be because they're demigods. Okay, well, let's look at the other Radahn. So, when Mikola revives Radahn, he's notably smaller, honestly looking a lot closer to the size he was in the intro, where Morgoth is beating him. So, we could assume this increase in size would be due to his acquisition of a great rune, right? While it may not immediately have had an effect, as supposedly Radahn should already be in possession of that great rune by the time that image takes place. Either way, there's an undeniable correlation between great rune and size. Turning back to Radahn again, look at just how big he is when we fight him in the DLC. He's smaller, for sure, but still notably a giant compared to any other demigod. So, if we're to assume that this Radahn is one whose body has not yet been altered by a great rune, why is he still so big? This leads me back to the conclusion that it is simply thanks to some giant ancestry we can attribute his size. As for why his siblings aren't that big, I'd say it's just a classic story of recessive genetics, possibly skipping generations before reaching Radahn. Ranni's body is also a little big, but nowhere near the size of her brother, which is also up to question, because Ranni, unlike the children of Marika and Radahn, shouldn't technically have any demigod blood in her. Like I said, if Radahn were to have his own genetics and thus his own body, then he isn't necessarily a god in any way, at least not at this point in time. As an aside, we don't necessarily know when Radahn became a god or otherwise aspect of Marika, but it would presumably be after his union to her. Union as in marriage. One last thing though is Rennala, who is also pretty tall, seemingly taller than Radahn. Well, we know that Carian is descended from the mountaintop astrologers, and we know the astrologers had good relations with the giants, so it's very possible that those good relations led to some possible mixing. Now, as for how scientifically that would work, I'll leave it up to your imagination. We do know that some giants are smaller than others, and some humans are naturally bigger than others, possibly due to a whole number of reasons. So there was for sure some level of middle ground in which two suitable mates could have met in. That leads us to another discussion, how some humans in general appear bigger than others. I think this can mostly be attributed to generations getting smaller over time, especially as they become more distant from the Crucible. The giant crusher description does at least somewhat imply that humans have gotten smaller over time. Though some have pointed out how we could be reading too much from this line, I largely agree with these implications. It seems to me that anyone with ties to the Crucible can naturally be of a larger stature. Godfrey and his own personal militia, the Crucible Knights, are all pretty tall. And we also have our Tower folk, most of whom seem relatively average in height, but the biggest of which, like the Divine Beast Warriors, are the most tied to the Crucible and its power.